hello everybody, and welcome to this new session. It's going to be a little bit shorter today because I'm in Germany and I have to leave afterwards. But we planned everything with Martin, and Claire and Aurore are going to moderate this session today. So thank you very much, Claire and Aurore, for agreeing to do that. And I'm going to let you introduce our speaker for today. Thank you so much, Martin. Vielen Dank for being here today.
Thank you for asking me. It's a pleasure.
So, Martin, you currently work at the Department of Physics in the Freiburg University, sorry, of Education. You do research in cognitive psychology, and your current project is what students learn from hands-on activities. I don't know if I should translate in French also or not, Pascal.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so before you studied physics and geography at the Philipps University of Marburg, I'm sorry for the accent, and got a PhD in physics didactics. And in your research, you focus on the role of language in learning physics, the promotion of experimental skills, and climate education in physics lessons. So, well, you're also particularly interested in the extent to which an understanding of scientific ways of thinking and working facilitates a willingness to act in the context of climate change. And yeah, that was it for our presentation. Do you want us to talk quickly also about the articles that you sent, or it's not necessary?
I will give
Okay,
the most
perfect.
important information.
So
yeah.
it's up to you.
Thank you very much, Claire.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Thank you for this nice introduction. I think you said more than I planned to say about me, but very good. Yeah, hello from my side. I will just share my screen. I prepared a little presentation, and actually I do not talk just about one paper because I want to give the papers a little bit more context, that you understand why we do this research and why it's probably relevant. So I talk a little bit more about different stuff, and my overarching question is, can education act as a social tipping point for mitigating climate change? So if we teach students something about climate change, the question is, what should we teach them? Can this help us in achieving our climate-related goals, like lowering carbon dioxide emissions or in general greenhouse gas emissions? And is this realistic? And how should an education that facilitates something like that should look like? Yeah, it's really the question, what is the relation about education, knowledge that you achieve by education, and acting? And yeah, so I just give you a brief background. You probably know all about that. So there are things that are scientific facts, so that are accepted by the scientific community, like most of the scientists, nearly all of them agree on that. And in the case of climate change, we have this IPCC, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that publish regularly, I think every 5 years, a report about the current state of research. So compared to other fields of research, we have an institution that brings together the evidence. So what is great, you can think about this if it's a little bit politically influenced, this IPCC, but I think there are all countries sent their representatives to this institution. So it's hard to believe that it's pushed into one direction. So it's great to have that. And if we can cite this, and if you look there, then you see that research agree that we already have a global warming of 1.1 degree compared to pre-industrialization. The projections for the future of the end of the century is about 3 degrees. Even if we are taking some measures, and if we're not taking dramatic measures. And in Germany, we already have a 2-degree increase, and I think in France probably is similar. So the consequences are also discussed and well researched. So we will lose ice, sea ice, land ice, snow cover. This will lead to a sea level rising. The question is how big the sea level rising will be, but that there will be a sea level rising, and you can already measure that risings. The oceans are acidifying and corals are dying. You can already see that one. And in general, weather and climate extremes increasing. It's a question how to measure that. There's also evidence that you can measure that one. And the most important thing about that is that it's, of course, also influencing us, not just the nature. So we will have changes in regional agriculture and stuff like that. And the last report from 2002 ends with a very specific call for urgent actions, because we are looking to social impacts, economic losses, and increased risk of conflicts. There are also debates about which conflicts you can relate to climate change. So, for example, the civil war in Syria probably is influenced by changes in the climate that leads people to move toward the cities and make social problems in the cities. But the report ends with a call for immediate and most effective action. So it's a very political statement. What was new about this report? So you're probably familiar with that one. And to make it clear, I put what that means. I put this figure here. It's from the climate dashboard. It's a German homepage. It's very nice because it visualizes scientific facts for education and communication meanings. So if you're looking for a nice figure to represent something, you can go there. And what this figure shows that the annual greenhouse gas emissions, that's THG, and particularly for carbon dioxide, it's also there. And then it's the budget that's left for Germany if we want to stay to the Paris Climate Agreement. And that's that red box here. So it means if we stay on the level of 2000, I think it was 2022, then it would mean that we have already used up our budget at the beginning of 2025. So we have already done that. And then you can, of course, think about how we can model that one. Maybe we have a steady decrease or such a decrease. You can see that, but you definitely see what we are doing is not enough to reach our aims according to the climate agreement, Paris Climate Agreement. Well, but climate change is not just like an issue of scientific facts or risks that come aside with climate change. It's also an issue of justice, and we can have at least two perspectives on this. One, there's one thing that's called intersectional justice. That means justice between regions of the world. So you see here the accumulated greenhouse gas emissions of different countries or areas like the European Union. It's that accumulated means over all the time. And you see that most of this comes from the Western or industrialized countries, and that there are smaller countries that have not contributed much to the carbon emissions, but they are effective of it too. So we have done something and other people are effective. That's normally assumed to be unfair. And there's also an issue of intergenerational justice. I think that one is a little bit more complicated. You know that one probably from Fridays for Futures argument. It's like, well, if our grandparents and we are doing emissions, and our children probably have to suffer from the consequences. But it's a little bit more complicated because our grandparents, they used a lot of less energy and less greenhouse gas emissions when they were young. And nowadays we are responsible for more emissions, and also we are using things that are built in the past, like buildings or something like this. So we are using things that are related to previous greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a little bit more complicated in this intergenerational case. And anyway, it's a question of justice, that because if we are continue to do what we are doing, there will be consequences for others that cannot opt out of these consequences. So it's definitely an issue of justice. So, and I want you now that you, I think you already know that, and probably, and I assume you are doing something already to mitigate climate change. And I just want you now to write down, and it's important that you really write it down before I tell you the story, what continues. What are you regularly doing to mitigate climate change? Yeah, so just write down what you do. And what is the biggest thing you have ever done to mitigate climate change? What could you more do to mitigate climate change? And what would be the most efficient thing you can imagine to do to mitigate climate change. I just give you like 4 or 5 minutes, and then we will continue.
Yeah, don't be shy. We're 15, 16 in this seminar, so you could add other things, even if they have already been said, doesn't matter.
Yeah. So, questions, do you need more time?
Do you want me to read what's been said in the chat? Maybe if you're
No, I don't want to do that because we come back to this issue later on. So
Okay.
I think I will continue. Okay. Yeah. So thank you very much for your responses. We will come back to this later on, and we will reflect on that after I tell you something. I have told you something about my research. So the question now is can education be a social tipping point? Was the title of my presentation. So I want to just give you a brief introduction into the idea of tipping points and social tipping points in particular, and then we will investigate if education can be such a social tipping point. So what is a tipping point? Tipping point is something, a point, when a system reached that point, the system changed dramatically. And the most important issue about a tipping point is even if you're going back to the value of the system that was before you reached this tipping point, the system cannot go back. And this is very important. So you can easily understand this if you look at the Greenland ice shield. So Greenland is covered by a big amount of snow, and new snow is falling on this ice shield, and it's there and staying there because it's cold. And if this ice shield melts down, and even if the temperatures go back to the time that have been previously, maybe nowadays or like 150 years ago, then the glacier is melted, so it's lower, and new snow will not stay there. It will melt away every summer because the ice shield is gone. So it's like going back to the previous temperature will not help us to rebuild the ice shield. And there are investigation of this. You see this in these scenarios. You have here, if we continue to emit greenhouse gases on a steady level, you see that on the left-hand side, and then we stop all of a sudden, like in 100 years. Then of course the greenhouse gas will increase until this 100 years, and then it will be on the same level. But if you see the yellow line here, that's that one, and you look here, then you see that still, even if we stop emitting, the ice shield is melting and melting and melting. It continues to melting. And even though if we stop and not increasing it, and even if we would go back and taking out greenhouse gas out on the atmosphere, it probably will not help because the ice sheet melted already so much down that new snow cannot lie on it. So there are different tipping points discussed in the climate system. And the idea is it's a specific point that the system changed dramatically and we cannot go back. And so social tipping point is a similar idea. And the question is there something in our social system, economic system, that acts similar? So if we change all our behaviors, that we come into a situation that the economic system change, our society change, and that we cannot go back and will not go back to previous situations where we were emitting a lot of greenhouse gases. So in this case, it's positive, the social tipping point. So what needs to happen that the social system is changing so dramatically that we are stopping emitting greenhouse gases. That's the basic idea of this social tipping point. It's in this case positive. And the research about this comes not from social science, it comes from natural science, because what they want to do is they want to include social dimensions in their climate models. So the idea is that we want to mitigate climate change and we want to see in our models what will be the consequences of social actions, so something humans do like socially or in the economic systems, how this will influence the climate system. And they are interested in this, of course, because they want to see if we can mitigate climate change, what will be the consequences and so on. So that is the idea of these social tipping points. It's about climate modeling. And there's this paper of Otto. It's easy to read. It's nice to read. And they mention education as one social civic tipping point. So they say, well, probably if we have the right education, this can change the behavior and way of thinking, the values of an entire generation and maybe all people of the world. And then this can lead to change and we can successfully fight climate change. That's the basic idea, like very roughly sketched. So the question is this realistic? Can education add as a social tipping point? And if so, how should this education look like? And you can break down this question. You need to break down this question in sub-questions. So the first question we have to ask is, what do students learn when we teach them? So it might be that we cannot teach them anything relevant and that they don't understand the topic, they don't get it. Then of course teaching will not lead to mitigation. Yeah, so we need to teach and the students need to learn. And if the student have learned something, then they need to act. So it's not logical that if you learn something, you're directly acting. But if you're acting, then probably the next question is the action you are taking, like the examples that you have written down there in the chat, is this relevant for mitigating climate change? So there are like small step questions we have to answer. And I will now go through these questions, try to answer them. And afterwards, I try to give you an overview if it's, how education must be, that this one is probably realistic. So the first one is about my meta-analysis. So we're addressing the question of the effectiveness of climate change education. So that's the first question. And we also looked at the impact of climate change education on action. So students who are going through an intervention on climate change, will they act differently in their private lives, for example? So just give you a brief idea of what is a meta-analysis about. The meta-analysis is about summarizing empirical findings in a field, for example, climate change education. It's also very well known in medicine. So like all big decisions in medicine, for example, if a new drug is put into the market or not, is based on meta-analytic evidence. And the problem of evidence reasoning is, if you have evidence, then you seldom have like evidence that pointing all into one direction. Yeah, and we see this in this figure. You see here the line, it's effect sizes. I will explain you in a minute what this is about. But then you see the 0 line. That means there is no difference between a treatment and a control group. And then you see a positive effect. That means, well, the treatment group is better than a control group. For example, the drug is working. And then you see negative values, means it's worse. It's not even like the control group is doing better than the treatment group. And then you see like these lines. It's the confidence interval, or like the certainty of this finding. And what you see is we have like studies that clearly show a positive effect. We have some studies showing clearly a negative effect, like that one. And we have a lot of studies that include the 0 line in their confidence interval. So we cannot be sure what these studies are telling us. And meta-analysis is a method to summarize these findings and to see what evidence is really there and what evidence we can probably trust and what not. So I will tell you how this works in a minute. Yeah. So this is just an example. It's not from climate change education, but just that you understand what the idea is behind that. So it's clearly, well, what can you do if you're not doing a meta-analysis with diverse findings? You have to discuss this, you have to go into this and say probably there are reasons for that one and that one, what is the difference and stuff like this. It's very complicated and often you probably find no reasons. And the other way is what many researchers do is you selectively citing just evidence that is supporting your argument. But I think, agree that that's not a good idea in evidence-based reasoning to have a one-sided view on the evidence. So yeah, what is the idea of a meta-analysis? The idea is a little bit mathematic, but it's very easy math. We need basically we want to compute a mean over all studies, but we cannot use the original values of the study because, for example, the study has a test, and in one test you can get 0 to 10 points, and the other test you can get 0 to 100 points, and how to compare that, like having a mean of 5 and 50, is it the same or not? So we need a measure that, or we call this effect size, how big is the effect of an intervention. And these measures should be comparable across studies. It should represent the magnitude and direction of the relationship. So which group is better and how much better is which group. And it should be independent of the sample size. Because if you consider, like, there are values like the t values that include the sample size, but we want to include the sample size later on, but not here. We just want to see, like, compare it on an even level. Yeah. So one thing you can do this is the effect size called Cohen's d. And the basic idea is here, you just calculate the difference between the mean of a treatment and the control group, and you divide it by the standard deviation. So then you get values. They can be bigger than 1, smaller than 0, so they can be everything. And the idea is 1 means that the treatment group was 1 standard deviation better than the control group. That's how we interpret and read it. And in education, most of the effect sizes are like around 0 and 1. It's seldom that you have bigger effect sizes than 1. But there are different areas, like in medicine, where you can have effect sizes greater than 1. And what happens if you do that one, I just put here in a little bit as example. We can imagine having one study where you can get a maximum score of 10 and another one of 100. And the idea is that if you have, in the one case, you have a mean of 5 and 30 and a standard deviation of 2.5. And in the other case, you have 50, 30, and 25, not 2.5. And if you then do the calculation, you see that you get the same effect size. It's scale independent, we call this. And that's the basic idea. So there's like a little bit more mathematics behind this if you want to make it precise, but that's the idea. More you don't have to understand if you want to understand how effect sizes works. So what we are doing is we calculate this value, effect size, for every study, and then we can go there and calculate the mean, and then we can contrast studies, look like studies who are sharing a specific characteristic. Do they have bigger effect sizes than studies not sharing these characteristics? For example, are studies with older participants more effective than those of younger participants? Yeah, so that's the idea of a meta-analysis. That's what we did with climate change education. These are typical steps of a meta-analysis. So you have to find the research questions, search for literature, and the aim is to find everything, like not just the thing that you find easily, but you have to really dig into the literature and find all the studies, maybe also a bachelor thesis, a PhD thesis, not just published studies, and in general in all languages. That's the idea. Like if you do it in medicine, you have to be very sure that you find all the evidence, because if not, then you have a bias. If you just look for English literature, you probably don't get information about how a drug works in Africa or somewhere else. Yeah. So finding the literature, then you have to develop a coding manual, coding your primary studies, looking if they're relevant or not, and some characteristics. And then you do effect size calculation for every study. Then you can do the analysis and then interpret the data. So what were the guiding research questions for our meta-analysis was, one was, what is the average effectiveness of climate change education studies? So what is the mean effect sizes? Is it effective? Do students learn something? And we differentiated between knowledge, so they understand what climate change is, attitudes, are they willing to act, and actually behavior. Do they take action after they report about climate change? We also asked some moderator questions. There are 2 important. We asked more, but I just put 2 here. And it is, does the content of the intervention influence the effect size of the intervention? And I think in climate change education, you can think about that. Do we really have to understand all the physics behind climate change to act? Is this important? And even if you go to the physics, how much details do you know about the physics? Or is it enough to talk about the reasons that we are emitting greenhouse gases and what we can do to mitigate it? So the content is really, really an issue. And we also ask for treatment duration. How long is the treatment? teacher characteristic and grade level. So how old are the students? So the studies that differ in these variables or these characteristics differ in the effectiveness. Yeah, just a brief overview of our literature search. That's the work. That's what you have to do. We search for the literature, and is complicated. And we found more than 6,000 papers that are potentially relevant. Then we removed some duplicates. That's an easy one. But then we screened about 5,000 of these studies. Like we're reading the title, we're reading the abstract, and deciding if this is probably relevant or not. Then we can lower it down to just 620 studies where we were not sure if they are relevant or not. And then you have to read the papers, 600 papers. You don't have to read everything, but you have to go into the paper and check, is it the correct population? So we focus on school-aged students, so not university and not kindergarten, but primary, secondary school students. Do they report the important information and so on and so on? So you have to go into it, and we finally ended up with 53 studies meeting our inclusion criteria, and that's about very typical for meta-analysis. Like 1% is probably relevant, but that's the big work you have to do. Yeah. So afterwards, what we then can do is we can calculate the effect size for every study. And there might be studies that have multiple effect sizes. Meaning, for example, you have 2 treatment groups that differ slightly and 1 control group, so you can calculate 2 effect sizes. Or you have multiple measures, like 1 group, 1 treatment group, 1 control group, but you have a measure for knowledge, attitudes, and climate action, or like for different knowledge facets. For example, the physical science background and the like social system knowledge or something like this. So you can have multiple effect sizes per study. That's why, for example, if it comes to knowledge, we have 43 studies that report outcomes related to knowledge. And in these studies, or based on these studies, we can extract 132 effect sizes. And when it comes to knowledge, we found a mean effect sizes of 0.77. Means that in average, the students learn about 0.7 standard deviations, or they are 0.7 standard deviations better in the treatment group than in the control group, or in the post-test than in the pre-test. So these values don't tell you so much if you're not familiar with meta-analysis. And what is a big effect or a small effect really depends on your area. But for education, this is very big. That's really big. You seldom have bigger ones in educational context. But I found this very often in meta-analysis, particularly regarding physics. It's a complicated issue. And if you're not educated, so if you're in the control group and you don't get anything, no systematic education about a topic, you don't get it. So it's if a topic is complicated, education is more relevant. That's the basic idea. So teaching about this is very efficient, teaching knowledge about this. And then it comes to the other 2 graphs, and this is about attitudes and climate action. By the way, how to interpret these graphs, you see here, the point again is the effect size of this study or one study. Then you see these lines, it's the uncertainty. You see the 0 line, and it's just ordered by magnitude. So not by studies, by magnitude. Just a nice idea to demonstrate it. And you can, for example, see that regarding knowledge, there are just a very few studies, 2, I guess, or 2 effect sizes smaller than 0. So meaning that the point is the estimate is smaller than 0, and the confidence interval is not including the 0. So that's like basically all studies showing positive effects. And then what you also see is that around the mean effect sizes, there are many, many effect sizes. Of course, there are very big ones that are totally unrealistic, and there are smaller ones. But in general, you see this mean represents something. Most studies are in this area. Yeah. And if it comes to attitudes, we realize that there are more studies, showing negative effects, more studies showing negative effects. That, yeah, of course, again, they're in the mean, there are a lot of studies in this mean area, but we see this negative effects. And the mean effect size is smaller, like 0.39. And if it comes to action, you have a similar picture. Actually, we not have negative ones, but we have a lot of one that are zero. So getting climate change education and you don't change your behavior. And it's also very much smaller than the one of knowledge. So now the question is, how reliable is this finding? And I can say from my experience, very reliable. In our case, it was not good for us, but for the research fields, it's good that there was a paper published, a meta-analysis with a similar aim. It's a little bit different, just like 2 years before our study. Actually, we didn't know that meta-analysis when we started our work. So we were thinking we were the first one who doing a meta-analysis. And the interesting point is they have nearly identical findings, but only 5% of the studies that they included are included in our meta-analysis. So it's a different body of studies. What is interesting, because both of our research group claim that we found all the studies, but we did not. If you're interested, we can talk about this in the discussion, what might be the reason. But the results are very, very similar. So meta-analytic results are in general very stable. The question is how useful they are, what is their meaning, but they are very, very stable. And well, we can sum up. Teaching knowledge is efficient. Students learn something, but this knowledge does not translate directly into attitudes and climate action. And yeah, there can be some reasons. Yeah, we can discuss this later. We also look for moderator analysis. So what explains differences in the effect sizes? What is interesting regarding the knowledge is that we didn't find many significant moderator effects. I just brought you the significant ones, or the significant and interesting ones. And we found that studies who were teaching very basic knowledge about the climate system. So what is the difference between weather and climate? What is radiation? What is the global climate system and so on, that they are more efficient than studies who do not teach this basic knowledge. So maybe, yeah, we can talk about these reasons, maybe different reasons. And then we found a very interesting effect size moderator effect here. And it says that regarding attitudes, that the longer a study is, so if their study is longer, taking weeks or something like this, that we have smaller changes in attitudes. So talking more about climate change, leading to less positive feelings about the relevance of doing something, climate change. Yeah, we also can talk about that one. Yeah, so to sum up, so far, what does our findings show? Can students learn something about climate change? Yeah, a lot, even though it's complicated. So some people, they say, well, you don't teach this, it's too complicated, the students don't understand it, they don't learn something. No, it's not true. They can understand it, they learn something. We also have some evidence about the relation between learning and acting. Well, I mean, having an effect size around 0.4 is not nothing, but it's much smaller than we would probably hope. And it might be complicated why it's smaller. We will discuss this one. But there's one question left, and this is, so even if the students would start doing something, is it relevant for mitigating climate change? And I just have 2 slides about that one. And yeah, I'm also interested in what you think about this one. So we can model that one actually, like with very easy mathematics. What is the impact if we collectively change our behavior? Of course, this is just an estimate. That's not real science, and the real models are much more complicated. But I think to understand the problem, we get very good results. So I make 2 assumptions. We only consider emissions from the energy sector, so heating, electricity, but for example, not eating, meat consumption or something like this. And we assume that a constant relationship between emissions and energy. So like if you're using 1 kilowatt hour of energy, it relates to an X amount of greenhouse gases. And this can also be different because if you have different systems. So, but we assume that this is stable. And then you can make a very easy mathematics. Then you can just say, well, our total energy is a predictor of our greenhouse gas emission. And now we have to calculate the change. And so how much do we change our behavior? So how much percent we lose less energy? And the second variable we need to consider is how much of the energy used is related to private consumption. Because some of this energy might be used for business and something like this, so it will not change. If you stop going by car, doesn't mean that the building sector will use less energy. And you can just calculate this, like, and then you see how much we can change or save. And well, I just did an example for Germany, and we know for electricity, that's about 25% of the electricity is used in private households in Germany. Might be a little bit bigger in France. I'm not sure because you're heating a lot with electricity. But if it comes to like these 25%, it really often appears. It's the same with you go to natural gas. It's the same percent. So it's not a lot. It's just like 1/4 is really related to private consumption. And then we can probably look for studies that say something about how much do people change their behavior. And there's a meta-analysis for about this one about electricity consumption. And there were a lot of studies, over 100, because it was very relevant in the 1970s when we have these energy crises. There was a lot of research. Can we motivate people to use less energy? And so what they found is an average saving over all studies of 7.4%. The most efficient way to motivate students to save energy is if you give them a personally energy audit, meaning you're going at home and say them, do this, change this equipment and do that, then you save. And that's the biggest, then you get the biggest effect. And another interesting finding is if you do social comparison. So you're putting a board somewhere in the building and saying, this person used that much energy, the neighbor that much. So like blaming people for using energy is efficient. If this is a good strategy, I don't know. So then we can do the calculation. And what is interesting is that even in the best case, like these personal energy audits, we are just saving about 3.4% of energy. And I would say that's equivalent to the changes in greenhouse gas emissions. And the realistic case, it's even about just 2%. So that's really frustrating that what we're actually doing might not be so effective. Depends, like there are some cases where it might be more effective, but that's a general problem. And that's something most people don't understand. It's even complicated to talk about this because the other way around, it's different. It's very easy to motivate people to use the double amount of energy they regularly use. To waste energy is very easy, but to save not. So it's a question. Should we talk about this in education? Yeah. So what is the reason about this? The reason is that the percentage that's related to personal consumption is just very low. And we have, for example, there was this study in Germany about the Dirty 30. That's 30 companies that are responsible for 30% of the German greenhouse gas emissions. So it's bigger than other impact of the households. And we also have that negative personal behavior, like buying cars are subsidized by the state, and even business behavior is subsidized by the state because the state wants some branches of economy to grow, to be there. And that's an issue. And you see this in the news all the time. Like, yeah. So that's the idea. That's the problem. And well, another question is why, I mean, even if we act, this would be probably not so effective. We have to think about alternatives. But the question is why we have this knowledge behavior gap. So even if we teach the students something, they learn something very effective, they understand climate change, but they don't act. Yeah? And there's even a very interesting finding from Germany that we have a negative correlation between environmental attitudes. So how people value the environment, how willing they are to act, and pro-environmental behavior. So meaning how actually they change their behavior, what is their actual use of natural resources. And yeah, people with higher environmental attitudes in general have higher carbon footprint. The best predictor of a person's environmental impact is his or her income. So that's a little bit frustrating. Saying it is another way around, more educated people, they better understand what's going on with nature or in general or climate change in particular. They have positive, because based on this knowledge, they are willing to act or have positive attitudes. But because they are better educated, they earn more money and they have a higher consumption. That's a little bit frustrating. Yeah, and you can also explain this theoretically. If you want to explain behavior, there are theories. I don't want to go into the detail that explain why people choose a particular behavior, change their behavior, and so on. And well, the best thing, the best predictor of behavior change is intention, but this intention depends on norms and perceived behavior control. So, for example, if you think, well, I should change this behavior, but I really cannot influence it because I have to go by car, because other way I cannot go to my working place. I cannot really do something, then you are probably less willing to change your behavior. I think that's logical, and there's a lot of this model is used in many branches of psychology, business, and also health related things. So most of people know and understand why it's good to live healthy, but they probably have different norms because they like to drink, because they like wine or something like this, and probably they don't know how to control their behavior, and then there's no intention, then there's no behavior change. Well, so there's also an influence of others. It's very strong. So for drinking, for example, if you're in a group where everybody's drinking, it's less realistic that you change your intention or that you are not drinking. So these might be the reasons why education is not directly leading to action. And even though if it does, it probably is not very effective as a social tipping point, because we have not control about big amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah. So now I want you to go back to what you write it and put in the chat. So, and that you reflect which action that you took is probably the most effective, efficient one, and which the least effective one. That you can just reflect this. I just made one example for electricity. There might be differences. Then I want you to reflect a little bit. How does the things I told you influence your motivation to act? So, yeah, did you know that already? Does it influence your motivation to act? And of course, what alternative action can you think about? So, I mean, it's not the case that we should not teach climate change education at all, but what is the alternative? And maybe we can do this just in a direct discussion, not in the chat, in Zoom. And maybe you also want to share your picture if you want to. That's maybe more interactive.
I think somebody put in the chat before that they didn't feel very comfortable with the individual, like these small actions that we can take, like avoiding to take plane and eating less meat and so on and so forth. So I thought it was very relevant. I was myself thinking of adding in the chat that I'm trying to work on climate change education as one mean to act, but I didn't. So I think it's yeah, it raises some awareness, and it can sometimes even be used as an excuse not to take action. We could say, well, anyway, the planes are flying. Even during COVID, the planes were still flying because they needed to keep the tracks in the sky. So there's no point in stopping to act. But there's also this theory, and maybe you're planning to talk about it, that if enough people change individual habits, in the end, it can have some broader effects. So maybe trying to, I don't mean to convince other people to take small steps, but just to act as an example. And I also had one question. It's the role of emotions in changing behavior, which we haven't talked about yet. And I wondered whether you were going to talk about it later in your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I will say a little bit about that later on. I just want to make like the problem, starting with the problem, making it a little bit
Yeah, thank you
clearer.
very much for
Yeah,
that. It's very
you know,
clear.
yeah. But I think like if you really think about that, what do the students mean? So I just made this calculation, and it's a little bit frustrating, but it was just about electricity. So you can be critical about my modeling or my assumption. And of course, what we have to think about is, for example, when it comes to food, it's a little bit different because food, most of what happens in agriculture is actually for consumption by humans. There's some things that go to energy, making gas out of it or oil or something like that. But most of it is for consumption. Also international consumption, so meaning if you in France consume less, the farming products will maybe export it into the world. But it depends. So I'm not don't know the exact numbers, but I would suggest that changing your eating habits is probably the one biggest things that you could individually do to mitigate climate change. And it's also that it has direct effects on like if we stop eating meat, it's very fast that they would stop producing meat because you cannot put it in a stock or something like this. And it's even not so easy to sell it on a global level. Yeah. But what is about your motivation to act? Does it lower your motivation? Do the students think about that? Well, so for me personally, probably not so much, but because I'm like this physics, I like to be efficient, for example, with energy and yeah, I also think the case of a role model and so on, so on. So for me, not so much. But I have to be honest, I know these results for a longer time. I think I already was thinking about this issue when I was in secondary school 20 years ago, because I was somehow that I realized that it's not just about our private behavior. Yeah. And well, we could talk about alternatives. There were some great ideas. We could just have a look into what is the alternative and how can education relate to these alternatives or contribute to these alternatives. Yeah, and the idea is that we probably have to focus on different kinds of actions. I mean, maybe not avoiding private sphere actions. So private sphere actions, most of the things that you put in the chat, it's you are consuming less meat, you are avoiding to go by plan, you avoid to go by car and stuff like this. So it has a direct effect because you're lowering the emissions of greenhouse gases, but it's very, very small. And there's an alternative action that's public sphere action. So these actions typically do not have a direct effect like climate education or like campaigning or convincing others to join or to not emit greenhouse gases or even political things you can do. So they are not direct, but if they can be systematic, because if they can influence the behaviors of many people, probably all people of society, they have a very huge effect. And the question is, how can education contribute to these public sphere actions? What needs education look like to contribute to these public sphere actions? And what is the current state in climate change education also? Yeah. And I just want to give you a brief overview about such public sphere actions or what they can address. They can, for example, address political regulations. And this is this is political science. These are facts. You can do this. You have three ways of controlling behaviors or influencing behaviors. It's market mechanism, like saying you're just allowed to produce so much greenhouse gases, and if you do less, you can trade your budget, and then you have a market mechanism. That's what the EU is already inventing. You can tax and subsidize things, making things more expensive or cheaper. For example, in the case of alcohol consumption, it's that alcohol is more expensive, liquor is more expensive than other food or stuffs. And of course, you can work with prohibits and standards if you say it's not allowed to sell something, to do something and stuff like this. It's with illegal drugs, that's the case. So it's political regulation. These are the toolbox. You can use this. And if you use this change individual behavior and also economic systems, because if it's not allowed, then people don't do this, or many people don't do this. And actually, this can lead to huge or big greenhouse gas emissions. And I want to give you a practical example. What is great, because we are all in the European Union, and it's the eco-design requirements for non-directional household lamps. It's from 2009. You're looking very young. You probably don't remember that. I remember that. I was like in my mid-20s, 2009. It was a big issue. So the European Union said that specific lamps are not allowed to sell in the European Union anymore, or even to bring into the market at a particular point of time. And there was energy efficient requirements. So they need to have a particular energy efficiency. And if they don't have these, then they are not allowed to sell anymore. And people get crazy because, they don't like LED light and stuff like this. So they blame a lot about this law. Anyway, the EU invented it. It happens nowadays. Young generation don't know that something else than LEDs ever existed. It's totally normal, and it's changed the way of light bulb production on a global level, because nowadays it's all over the world. LEDs are the standard. You can just buy them, and even they're better and more comfortable than the previous light production system. And to make this clear, what was the idea? You can save 40 tons, terawatts of electricity by just changing by this law regulation, and it's equal to the Romanians' annual electricity consumption. So like the energy consumption of the whole country in the European Union, just by changing our lighting system. You see 10 500 megawatt power plants, also big ones, and 10 is a lot. And basically by nothing, like you just change your light bulbs and nothing else. Yeah. So it's a great idea, and it's a lot of going on in this eco design in the European Union. It's the European Union is leading in this in the world, and it really changed markets and really changed behavior of a lot of people. And you might be familiar with this. There are a huge debate about this always. Now it's about if it should be avoided to sell oil burning cars, so cars that are running with oil and not electric cars, by a particular point in time. And the research say it's possible. We should do that. It's efficient, but of course, Germany as a big car exporting country, the politics say something about this. But in general, it's very efficient. The eco design is an idea of the European Union that a producer is responsible not for everything, not just for the safety of the product and everything that happens during the production, but for the lifelong impact of the product on our environment, on the humans. And it's great. It's very efficient, and it's just efficient because we have the European Union, because single countries cannot do something like this because nobody cares about the buying of French or German people of light bulbs. It's too small. You know, we need these 400 million people in the European Union that this is efficient. So just to give you any idea what is very efficient measures to mitigate climate change. Yeah, so we did a meta-analysis, also not a meta-analysis, a review on climate education research, and we asked, do they address these issues, or what they actually do? And what is very interesting is, I just show you this one example, is that nearly all of the climate education tells a story like this. So we had industrialization, and this industrialization leads to greenhouse gas emissions. And now we have to do something about this. And this means you as a person have to change your behavior. And if you think about this, that means that we say the responsible or the cause of these emissions, they were public. It was not your grandfather did this. He was boiling or using coal. It was the Industrial Revolution, so a societal event. But now you as a private person have to fight against this and change your behavior. And this is something like even in the stories, in this narrative, it doesn't make sense. And if you then look on the studies, what they address, there are some that address public sphere actions, so that they don't say you should change, but we should change, some bigger groups changing. But nearly 90% of these just focus on voluntary agreements. So they made something like, oh, in the school, we agree on that everybody is going by bike now or something like this. But regulations that I told you before, like strong political measures that avoid or regulate greenhouse gas emissions, they are not talked about at all. And I think there was just one or two studies, and interesting, they came from an Asian background, like Taiwan or something like this. I was expecting that this would probably be in a Western country. No, not in our case. Yeah, but I think that's problematic because we're shifting the responsibility for mitigating climate change to the private sphere. And it's first of all, it's unrealistic. It's probably not very motivating, and it's even against scientific facts. It doesn't work. That's the point. And yeah, discursive debates, something like this, we didn't found in the literature. But it's very interesting because we had this Fridays for Future movement, and it was basically about more political regulation for climate mitigation. So the students came up with these ideas, but the school is not reacting to it. And I think this is something that's very interesting. Yeah, there was a question in the chat. Yeah.
Comments in the chat, yeah.
Yeah. So they're just the numbers for France. I think they're interesting. It's 34% for France is related about transport. The question is this individual transport or public? And agriculture is 20%. So the numbers are very similar to the one that I actually presented you. Yeah. Not taking the plan. Yeah. So there are some individual things you can do, but just telling you the story, in Germany, they put more taxes for in-country flights, small distance flights. They are making them more expensive, the last government. Then people were going more by train. And even though the German train system is really bad, so it was efficient. But then now our current government, just like 2 weeks ago, they lowered the taxes again because people were less flying and local airports were losing their passengers, and also that they plan the courses, that there is a plan going from this local airport anywhere. So there you see how efficient political relations are and what happens. Yeah. So I think this is really, really sad that if it's efficient, you see, based on the fighting against these measures, that they are efficient. Yeah. So, but the question is, how can we address this one in education? I think an obvious case is, and I always tell this if I talk to teachers, the one thing that is very easy is just tell the facts. I mean, just tell the students that ecologic regulations exist, that they are normal. They exist even for more than 200 years. It's totally normal. It was a law in Germany that you are not allowed to shit into rivers because they made the beer out of the water of the rivers. So it's an ecological regulation. So it's and this one was like 500 years old. It's very normal. So this of course is something we should do. Just tell the facts, and probably then the students will support political measures or even campaign for something, or do something. But we have like a more sophisticated view on it. So what can you do? What should be the aim of climate change education? And one big idea is to focus on agency. So supporting students. What is the idea of agency? Agency is intentional action to actively influence social systems. It means that you are not acting because your teacher says that you should act or something like this, or that you're just randomly acting, or unintentionally that intentional action means that you say, I do this because I want that and I want to change something. Because like there's something in a group of friends, like person is saying something not so nice and you don't want this, and you say to him or her, please stop doing that. This would mean you intentionally say this because you want to influence the social system. This is the mean by agency. And I think agency is an interesting construct in the context of climate change for multiple reasons. So first of all, we do not know what the best behavior it really is, because things can change. The technology will change. We can't students tell, just do that one. Or if we tell them, just stop eating meat, they will not do this. But what we need is that they can find and define goals on their own and act according to these goals, and bring these goals into action. And the idea is also, if you have agency, that you don't see yourself as a hopeless victim of society or something like this, but as a person who has an opportunity to act, not a victim, but an actor who is fighting for her ideas and stuff like this. So agency, it's actually a psychological construct. There's a lot about research about this since 50 years. It's not something that is political or related just to climate change education. So there's the work from Bandura, who was interested in people who make a difference. So people, for example, who build up a company. So what is the difference? Why can they do this? Why they change the system around them, creating jobs, creating great products and stuff like this. So there's a lot about agency from this side, and it's now becoming more and more popular in education, particularly in science education. And even though agency is one aim of or something that's measured in the next PISA study. So I think in 2026 in September, you will read something in newspaper like, oh, France students, they don't have high agency, and German students, of course, are not too. So it's a prominent construct. So, and the question is, what if it comes to agency, the question is agency regarding what? I mean, who should do what? That it should be intentionally is clear, but what should I do? And we can also have a systematic view on this. And I borrowed this idea also from this Otto paper on social tipping point. And they said, well, if you are an individual, you have a choice. How do you want to act? And this is the upper corner, as an individual, just on your own, or do you want to join a collective, like a group of people? This is one dimension, and the other dimension you have is you can think about, do I or we want to act in our everyday life, reducing air travel, reducing meat consumption like this, or do we want to be strategic or political, like campaigning for eco design, talking about that so that people can, in their election, in their voting, that they know this and stuff like this. yeah, so we have these dimensions, individual or collective, everyday or strategic, political. And I think it's very important to differentiate this because you need different things to do these different kinds of actions, actually. So there's always the question, who should act and what is the aim? The everyday or strategic or political? And I just put some examples into it that you understand this. And the green ones are all about diet, vegetarian, or reducing meat consumption. Yeah. So an individual everyday action would just that you say, I reduce my meat consumption, being vegetarian or just reducing it. I think that's very clear. But something that you could do as a collective on the everyday life could be a so-called carrot mob that you go there and put a pressure on, for example, local businesses based on a group that you say, for example, well, we would do a bigger party, but we just choose your restaurant if you sell that week only vegetarian food. If not, we go somewhere else. So the idea is you're a big group, you're still in the everyday, not going to political regulations or something like this, but you're putting together, and because as a group you have probably stronger and you can make restaurants or something like this to change. And I think if it comes in Germany, there was this initiative for veggie days, so meaning that in public dining rooms, there should be one day a week where they just sell vegetarian food. And you can ask for something like this, and probably because you're a big group, you will achieve this. You can also be individually strategic. You could sign a petition, or you can go in an election for persons or parties that support, for example, meat-free days or something like this. But that's very individually. But you also, of course, can organize something bigger, like campaigning politically, putting pressure on political decision makers, not the small based every day, but the big fish, and that would be probably be the bigger impact. So the question is, what do students need for these different kind of agencies? It's very different. You need something very different to make a political campaign or to choose just a plant-based diet. So yeah. Okay, so I just give you a brief overview. You don't have to read everything about this. So you really need different kind of knowledge. So we have something in the middle here. That means you need these for all these different areas of agency. And then we have something that is shared between this and this. It's the red one and this and this. And what I want to highlight is that, of course, for example, you need knowledge about institutional decision making, current political debates, and something like this. And this is very relevant if it comes to political and strategic agency, but not so much if it comes to individual everyday agency. However, you need knowledge, for example, about what is the most efficient thing that you can do if it comes to individual agency, to everyday agency. So you need, what is the impact of agriculture? What is the impact of transportation? What alternatives can I use? So you see there are just different things you need for different kinds of agency. And I think one thing that climate education needs to do is to focus, to make clear what kind of agency we want to facilitate, and then to focus on these issues. Yeah, of course, if it comes to collective things, you also need collaboration, communication, and you also need collective efficiency beliefs. That's a very interesting construct. It's not the idea that you can do something, that's personal efficiency, but that a group that you are a member of can achieve an aim. And it's like if it comes to complex problems, people sometimes or often say, I cannot do anything, but with this group, I'm very sure we can do something. Yeah. So this is like one thing, like broaden our view to the resources that students need for different kind of agencies and teaching these things. Yeah, I just have one brief example from my physics teaching why I did something like this, and it's about these light bulb European eco design call lighting systems. And what I was aiming in, I was trying to support that my students are collectively acting on an everyday basis. So meaning that they understand why LED light is better, what the idea behind eco-design is, and that eco-design is probably not something worse, but a reasonable thing to do. And this is important because what we know is, even if we have these political measures and if we have these market regulations, students or people sometimes waste energy. So now you learn, for example, that your light bulb is very efficient. And what we realized is that people stop switching off the light because they think, well, it's just so little energy that it needs, so I can be turned on all the time. But of course, that's not, then we like having a rebound effect and not getting to the savings we could achieve. So, and I did this in my 7th grade physics class. It was a good place because they have optics and energy in this grade level. And so they can really understand why we need a blue LED, that this is optics, and they understand what energy is and the values of energy. And the idea is that they now can accept and act to this collective measure of energy saving, the LED lighting systems. Yeah, so this would be one example. And another example that's more innovative and probably you cannot do as a single teacher, you need like a whole school. It's something that's invented by a group or an initiative called Schools for Futures. And the idea is that the students actually participate, or they actually do measures to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of their school. So they do a review. What are the biggest areas of greenhouse gas emissions in our school? Then they made a roadmap. How can we reduce these greenhouse gas emissions in these areas? And also they campaigning for money and for changes in the school system. And so it's really that they do basically climate politics on their school level. And this is often called whole school approach. And I think this is very efficient because they then understand what is really the big player, what is really important to change, how can we do this, and probably they will also accept these measures in other areas, for example, in their private households or something like this, because they know that's efficient and how it works. So that's also something important. Yeah. So that's so far. That was my idea from how effective climate change education might look like. And now I'm interested in how your climate change education was at school or university level. How does it look like? What is your opinion? Is agency a realistic objective? Is there any hope that humankind can mitigate climate change? After hearing all the things, yeah, and I just interested in, you can probably personally respond or in the chat what is comfortable for you.
Thank you very much, Martin. It was really fascinating and very rich. I had a little comment about the question of agency. It reminded me very much of Kurt Lewin, who is one of the founders of action research and collaborative research, because he showed that it was during the after the war, when there was not enough meat to feed everybody. And the idea was that they had to convince people to eat not only the best part of the meat, but also to eat all the other things. And it didn't work to tell people, to explain, I mean, just to drop knowledge on people's heads and saying, well, this is the way it is and this is what you have to do. People needed to come up with solutions by themselves. So they had these groups discussing what can we do, how can we share the meat, and how can we make the best out of the situation. And when people came up with the idea themselves that they could eat parts of meat that they were they were not used to it, like liver and brain and things like that, it worked much better. So this idea of agency reminded me of this approach, and I think there are a lot of similarities. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think it's very also important to tell that these ideas or solutions are not so new, that we know them from the past, and that this is not something fancy for climate change research or climate change education. I think that's very, very interesting, and there the process or the reason behind this. I didn't tell so much about this today. It has to do a lot with norms, emotions, and also, well, we know that people, if you I say you should use something less, then you always look to the others, what they are doing. And if you talk about and you have the feeling that this is shared norms, values, shared expected behavior, then you are much more willing to accept such things. If you are like putting it a different way, if you think you're the only person who is doing that, you probably say, well, I'm the stupid idiot, and you're just flying all over the world, and that's not nice. And we see that really these, on a collective level, are the relevant variables for the big changes. And well, if you look at it, I think people also know this, like people in power and not in power, because I have the feeling sometimes they try to avoid that these collectives are happening. For example, in Germany, we had an initiative by the old government to have not a parliament, but they choose people by chance out of the population, put them into a group, like 150 people, and they have to talk about which agriculture do we want to have in the future. And they made a proposal and give it to the parliament. So it was a participatory process. And just like yesterday, they announced that they stopped doing this. And it was very efficient. It was the ideas were very good. They were people from all different backgrounds, and all of them agreed to this because they were in the process. They all can bring in their perspectives, and it was also much more realistic than what happens often in politics, because politics is sometimes they just do something because it's against the things that other people are thinking or that the other parties are doing. So, but it's I think people know that if people coming together, they can achieve great things, and that's why sometimes they don't want that. Yeah, yeah. There are great examples always from history. Even if it comes to climate change education, there's an example from Denmark from the 1990s where a school was just saying, well, let's think about how our district in the city should look like. And yeah, then we said, great, we need new lines for bike lines, so roads just for bikes and stuff like this. And it was in the 1990s. This was not usual in Denmark. And they were campaigning so hard, like the politics, they had no chance because everybody was just talking about that. They put it on the agenda. They were not prepared. And now it's more or less a standard in Denmark to having these bike lines. You know? And I think in general, people underestimate their power to act, and that's why they don't act. Like in Freiburg, for example, they want to build an atomic power plant in the 1970s, and the people were so much protesting about this, it was not possible just. And all people from all areas, like communist, conservative, religion, not religion, they all were together campaigning against this because they didn't want to have that. And they were there was no chance for economic interests or politics to do something else. And yeah. Yeah, and what is it? I would be interested in your, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I also had like a question because I saw in the chat a lot of person talking about frustration. And when we see the meta-analysis and the results in like behavior and attitude, we can feel like frustration and thinking that this climate change education isn't working the way we could want it to work. And I was thinking maybe it's like interesting to think in a long term, like in term of a more longer time. Like for example, when those students are going to start working and becoming like older and everything, maybe the action and attitude might change faster. And I think maybe that can bring like hope that your third question is talking about, and maybe like for the mitigate climate change.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's a good point about the meta-analysis. We could not cover this empirically, and I think it's even not realistic that there is a method to cover these things. Yeah, to relate back what education did to a person 10 years later, 5 years later. Yeah. And what is also getting like, then you have influence of others, and sometimes it's maybe enough to talk about an issue, and for example, to make so that students realize that they are a group, a generation, and that they are affected by climate change. And this can change their behavior later on. And yeah, that's a great impact, a great idea. Yeah. So I generally like want to, it's always the question if how honest you were about, or the story you tell the students. So that's like one example where do you really want to tell them what their individual action, the impact of the individual action is or not? What is your aim? And it really depends, you know. So, I mean, there's also research from social identity, and this, I didn't present it to you today. And what also can be very productive to produce social identity is to treat students unfair as a group. So if I would treat you as a group really unfair, there's a high possibility that you will unite and stay against me. But I don't know how we can bring this into education, or if this would be a good idea in education. So psychologists, they suggest something like this, but I think it doesn't work in education if, yeah, to do something like this. Yeah. So I just have like 2 slides or ideas that give me a little bit hope, and I can share them with you. So one is, you probably, maybe you heard about this study, and it's just one study. There's a few of them, and multiple of them. And what this study shows, they did a survey, global survey, and they were asking people different questions. For example, are you willing to spend 1% of your income to mitigate climate change? Or do you support climate-friendly values? Do you want to have more ambitious political actions? So they asked these personal questions. And you see the results here, and these are the circles, so the upper line. And then they did an interesting thing. They asked another question. What do you think is the average willingness of other people to do this? And you see, and this is this triangle, and it's always lower. So we always under-expect the willingness of others to act and to join. And so just knowing and talking about letting people know that you are willing to do something, or that you are doing something, helps probably, you know. Uniting, knowing about values that we share, and I think this is globally. And there are countries that are like Saudi Arabia or something like this, that are living by selling oil, you know. So it's very interesting. I found this finding. So this gives me hope that actually there is like a shared global perspective on that. And maybe this is also a point where you can build a shared global identity. So we are humankind, and we want to secure the life on our planet for the future and for our kids. And we can do this. Like, if we all think about that, we are not French, American, or Africa, from Africa or something. We are all humans, and we can do this, thinking like this. Yeah, this is one thing that gives me hope. And another thing is I found this in a very old school book from 1984. So I was born in 86, so it's older than me, this book. And put it different ways, a person who, it's like 40 years ago, a person who lives at that time or graduated in 84 is now probably about 60, meaning he's at the end of his working life, probably in France 2 years, and Germany 7 more years. But anyways, he would have a whole life to change the world, like to make a difference. And the task in that year was what future energy system scenario do you want to have? And there were 4 scenarios. And these 4 scenarios was the point was always the year 2000. That's already 25 years past. And 2030, what it's very close to us now approaching. And they had to the task was choose one scenario and say why. And there were 4 scenarios, and you see scenario 1. And so this was the situation in 1978 in the middle of the energy crisis. And I think this is why the task was in the book, because of the energy crisis. And you see it, and then there's one scenario that it's pretty much no renewable energy, the status quo, more or less, having a lot of the old style energy production. And then it's getting like more and more innovative, and going up to this scenario number 4, where you have, it's Germany, we don't like atomic energy. You don't have any atomic energy. And 1/3 of the energy production is based on renewable energy. And this was in 1984 totally unrealistic. I think there was like the first wind turbines and the first photovoltaic equipment was on the market around this time. So the students, they didn't know how renewable energy looked like. They haven't seen it there. They had to choose. And if you now look at what happens, what is the reality now? So I have data from 22 and 2000, and it's of course from Germany. Then you see that we are very close to this utopian scenario from through 1984. We have this renewable energy. We still had 1 or 2 atomic power plants in 2002. So now this is actually 0. And our aim is for 2030 in Germany is 50%. We are now already in electricity. We are way above 50% already, but it's the total energy, also including heating and so on. We're probably not getting 50%, but I'm very optimistic that we're getting close to this 1/3. And I found this very fascinating, that this totally utopian scenario, and I didn't have any answers of students from 84, but I can imagine that most of them would be with scenario 1 or 2, and now reality is much better than this. And I think in general, societal and technology interventions and changes are hard to predict and non-linear. That's very important. So there is great hope that even in a short time, there can be really, really big changes. Yeah. So, and it's also, if you go to literature, then you of course, or arts, and then you of course also see that people are different stories. You see these worst cases, but you also see utopian literature. In this case, this is solar punk. It's a cartoon. The idea is to write and about and draw about a totally utopian, desirable future. And the fact that people are consuming this, that they are interested in this, also gives me hope, because it means that they are interested in these desirable futures. And if it's art, art works about shared norms and values, because if not, we could not understand the art. So then this is it's also a good sign. Yeah, so that was my input. Thank you.
Thank you
very
so
much.
much. Yeah, thank you so much for ending on a hopeful note. Hope was kind of the center of at least the emotion part of the subtitle of my seminar. And we've been talking about hope during the previous sessions as well. Is there still any comments or anything you would like to share? Otherwise, we will meet next week again on the normal time and normal place. And so I wish to thank you very much. Martin was very, very, very insightful. And using meta-analysis, I think for you students, it's really interesting to see that it gives you a much stronger idea of what's going on. And it's always easy to find one or two study on a small sample that's going to give you support for what you claim or what you would like to show. But meta-analysis are much stronger. So that from a methodological point of view, it was very interesting as well. Thank you very much. And I hope we can keep in touch, Martin.
Yeah, thank you. So, and for my students and maybe for you too, like it's also good, I think, climate education, if you're motivated, it's a nice topic to do your master's thesis, this, and meta-analysis is also nice for doing master's thesis. Okay.
Thank you very much. And see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.